I think smart people don't like to feel like they're being managed. I certainly don't. Like I don't like when somebody comes in with a smile on their face and is trying to work me. And so I try to be as genuine as I can with people. If you're having to like play someone, I think something's wrong.
One of the biggest mistakes I see new managers making at the companies I work with is not understanding the role of a manager, especially in highly technical organizations. That is why I am excited to talk with my guest today, Dan CaJacob. Dan and I have known each other for over 20 years, and he has worked all across the space industry. He helped build the FalconSat 3 as an astronautical engineer at the US Air Force Academy. He worked as a project manager at SpaceQuest and was the senior director of space systems at Hawkeye 360, helping the company grow to 50 people and raising over $100 million. In this conversation, we focus on the importance of communication. And Dan goes so far as to say that all organizational problems at a company start with communication problems. So, what is the role of a manager in solving these communication problems? That is what we were going to talk about today. If this is your first time listening to the Leadership Launchpad, please make sure you subscribe so you never miss a future episode. And if you get anything out of this conversation, then I ask that you please share this show with just one other person, because that, after all, is how we grow. I can't tell you how much it means to me. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. And with that, let's get into the discussion with Dan CaJacob. Dan, it's great to have you on the Leadership Launchpad. How are you doing today?
I'm great. It's great to be here, Matt. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, we've known each other for a really long time. Ever since I first met you, you were we you know I think the first thing we connected on was probably the space industry. What I mean, over the last couple decades, what are some of the things you've gotten to do in space?
Quite a bit. Yeah, my career went differently than I imagined it would. But back when we were cadets, the first thing I worked on and what really kind of set me on this path um, of launching a lot of satellites is working on FalconSat 3 um, in
Nice.
the with the Astro Department. So that was kind of a student satellite back then. There weren't CubeSats. There weren't many university satellite programs,
Yeah.
and this was a really big satellite that had some application for the actual real Air Force, and that lasted for I think it deorbited a few years ago, so it lasted almost 15 years. Uh,
Amazing.
and After that, I worked for a small commercial company in the DC area called Space Quest. And I came at a really good time because they had this giant contract they had just signed with a space billionaire named Robert Bigelow. He he
Oh,
he
nice.
had a chain of hotels, and he wanted
Yes.
to put space hotels up into low Earth orbit. And
Yeah.
he thought he could do it with machinists and things like that. So he had hired the company I was working for, Space Quest, to come in and do the avionics and do the mission planning and things like that. And so we put together three kind of short bus sized inflatable spacecraft, and they had cameras all through the inside, and they had cameras on the outside, and they had experiments and things like that. It was a lot of fun. It was a tough customer, um, but it was quite a bit of fun, and all the people that I worked on that with back then were all still friends, and many of us are kind of like, have our own companies and stuff in the space industry.
Very cool. Very
Um,
cool.
After that, we went back to smaller satellites at that company, and we built they're kind of 10-inch cubish satellites. We mostly focused on RF missions, and the most kind of exciting thing back then is we started the AIS business. So these are every commercial vessel has over a certain size has a radio transceiver on board. It's
Yeah.
meant for like ship to ship and ship to shore transmissions, but we figured we could receive it from space. we were able to do that, and we sold the data to customers, including, this was the early days of the space commercial industry, and our first
Yeah.
customer was like a hedge fund, and we ended up selling a lot of the data to another commercial company in Canada, and eventually sold them satellites. So we built, I think over the 10 years I was there, we built 8 or 10 satellites that we launched to orbit. And that kicked off the greater industry. Companies like Spire and others came along to pick up where we left off. One
Yeah.
interesting connection that I don't know if you were there at the time, but maybe you were. We at Space Quest actually built the Cuckoo radio for the Dragon C2 Plus mission.
Oh.
So
Oh
this
wow.
was, yeah, it was a little radio that got sent to the International Space Station, and it did the data communications to the capsule for that first docking. Um,
Okay. Cool.
and I remember that was a nightmare because
Ha.
there were really, we were the small scrappy company, and we typically didn't do a lot of paperwork, but um, it had some stringent requirements from NASA that I had to do a lot
I'm
of
sure.
environmental
Yeah.
testing on. But after that, around 2015, I'd been working on these RF missions. I was a spacecraft engineer. I'd gotten into software defined radio, and along came this new startup called Hawkeye 360. I got recruited into that as the first engineer and the director of space systems, and
Nice.
that is probably the coolest thing I've built in my career. Um, I went in thinking it was like a 50-50 shot. I didn't even realize this is like a commercial SIGINT application. So this is stuff that only governments had done before. And,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I knew I could pull it off, but, you know, I didn't know, I didn't know how hard it might be, or how easy. And anyway, we put that together. They've raised, to date over $400 million, and they're like a just squeaked out $1 billion valuation. They've just launched their 30th satellite.
Wow.
So they just in short, they launch 3 satellites at a time. They fly in formation. They all have software-defined radios on them and lots of antennas, and they geolocate RF signals. So if
Okay.
somebody's on a walkie-talkie or sat phone, every
They
satellite
can tell you
hears the
where it is.
signal at a slightly different time,
Yeah.
slightly different frequency. Throw a bunch of nerdy math at that, and you can solve for the location of the bad guy. And there's some good guy applications for it too.
I'm
Um,
sure. I'm sure.
and um, Going into COVID, I tried to raise money for a new space startup. Had absolutely no fundraising strategy,
Rough
and
time.
it was the worst time to do it. Yeah, we never met an investor in person, which is kind of normal now, but back then it was kind of new. It was all
Yeah.
through video calls, and that was a bit of a disaster. We never raised a dime, and sort of set that one on the back burner. Um, and then the last uh, probably 9 months ago, I spent about a year working for a small space-based solar power startup, and
Yeah.
that was a pretty interesting experience. And right now, I'm just consulting with clients that are trying to build constellations like I did at Hawkeye. Different applications, but
Sure.
kind of need that early help in the beginning.
So we're on quite the gamut of a lot of different, kind of different space industry sectors, different, kind of had some specific focus areas from a technical point of view, but you've gotten to see it from a lot of different places. Where in that journey did you first kind of step into any kind of leadership role?
Yeah, I think definitely it was at Space Quest.
Okay.
Space Quest has traditionally been, they still exist, but they were bought. It's always been less than 10 people, and it's always
Okay.
been, I always called it like the island of misfit toys. Like everybody was, including myself, we all had these weird quirks and very weird working hours and personalities, and I was definitely the youngest person coming onto the team. They were mostly older amateur radio guys. Um, but a lot of them were focused very narrowly, like either on RF or electronics or what have you. And my background with astronautical engineering is more of a systems engineering discipline. So
Yeah.
a lot of my career, a lot of the um, I'm I'm sort of naturally inclined to have the bigger picture, but at a company like that where it's so small, you really have to wear many hats. I love
Yeah.
that, and that sort of naturally slotted me into the role of the program manager there. Um, and so I was managing a lot of people that were a lot older than me, had a lot more experience than me in what they were doing across quite a few missions at that company. So that was my first experience with it. But at the same time, that company was very, you know, nothing was official. It was a very flat company.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
it was really at Hawkeye where I was starting to, you know, hire and fire people and um,
Okay.
sort of things like that. And of course, I mean, you and I, we've had experience in the military as well with these types
Sure.
of things, but it's a little bit different in the commercial world.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to. It definitely is different, and I love that you mentioned kind of the difference between like the formal and informal leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Since you mentioned kind of the misfit toys moniker, how since you found yourself, there's a couple things that I think we could dig into with that.
Yeah,
Like, how did you find dealing with those different personalities? Because I think that is something that often occurs in the technical world. Is we're there's a lot of quirky people in a lot of different ways. Yeah, how did you find kind of trying to bring those people together so that they could talk to one another? Since all these things, as you point out, like they have to work together. You can't all just live in your silos. So I don't know what was that experience like.
I think it was to some extent it was a lot. It was pretty helpful at Space Quest because the team was already pretty small, so they
Yeah.
already all knew each other. There were
Okay.
some that were prickly towards the others, but I think a lot of the challenges was on an individual level. Is some of them um, would be very sensitive to being interrupted, and so I
Mm,
really had to change my managerial approach with everyone individually. I kind of had
yeah.
a different approach, but overall it worked well, right? So I could,
Yeah.
um, and then like frankly, one of the things we did was that I thought was pretty simple and obvious at the time, and I still do is we would just have, we'd have one meeting a week, and it was the satellite design meeting, and we all sat down and we brought in lunch and we talked about where everything was, and it was, um, you might be tempted to call it a stand up, but I would never do that. I hate that word, but
Okay.
but I think it worked out really well, and one thing I've always tried to do is like I think smart people don't like to feel like they're being managed. I certainly don't. Like
mm,
I don't like
yeah.
when somebody comes in with a smile on their face and is trying to work me. And
Yeah.
so I try to be as genuine as I can with people. Um,
Yeah.
you know, like if you're having to do that, if you're having to like play someone, I think
Yeah.
something's wrong. You know, like it's
Interesting.
the wrong
In-
person or you're the wrong manager or um, yeah. Uh, but I've also been very lucky. I've stumbled and fallen into like great employees and colleagues. So
Yeah. Well, but I think a lot of that is, people are what you make of them in some ways, and so
mhm,
a great manager can, the same person can be a great employee and a horrible employee depending on their manager.
absolutely.
It's a lot of what you bring. And it's interesting the point you bring up about smart people don't like to be managed, because I know that I've found this. I even just like when I'm facilitating leadership development stuff for these kinds of audiences, the basically the first thing I say is like, look, I'm not here to teach you anything new. I'm not here to come in and be like, oh, I'm not going to do anything groundbreaking. No, when it comes to people skills, nothing new has been discovered in like 3,000 years. Like
Yeah.
it's all
Mhm.
there. It's just you don't have the time to focus on this stuff. You all are super busy. And so I'm just here to help you like spend 60 minutes or 90 minutes focusing on this thing so we can remind you of the things that honestly you probably already know.
Yeah.
And I think that does a lot to kind of disarm the situation,
Yeah.
as you said, because I'm not there to teach them
Yeah,
still
I
something.
I've read management books and I've read self-help books, but I can tell you I don't think I've ever really applied anything there. I think a lot of this stuff is like, you know, I don't know. It's you know when it's right, you know.
Mm,
um,
yeah.
and I've seen people try like, and these are great people. Like I promoted someone at Hawkeye, and he's great, and I still have like the most confidence in him. But he's the type of person that like I think he just doesn't have enough confidence in himself, and so he kind of he leans towards like the management books and things like that, and but doesn't you have to have like a self-critical step where you think like, okay, but is this right for this application? Because sometimes it can be, but
Mm.
maybe it doesn't make sense in some context, and I think he's skipping that self-critical step, but he still has all the right things at heart. So
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. Is I mean, that kind of goes back to your point of just being as genuine as possible, of like making, really evaluating the situation and kind of having that situational awareness to know, like, okay, like what's right here.
yeah.
One other thing you mentioned about that first experience was there were a lot of older people. It was a very established team, very experienced team. They all kind of knew each other. I think that can tend to happen a lot for people when they get promoted,
Hmm.
and maybe they're. So I guess there's two potential things here. One, how did you approach this fact that you were coming into a really well known team, and then potentially also kind of being like the systems person, the kind of trying to integrate everybody, but not from, you're not the expert in, they're bringing more knowledge than you are. So
Yeah.
like how did you kind of approach those two things?
Yeah, I haven't thought about that much, but you're right. So one thing here is, there weren't. Um, I would say most of the employees there was no. Most of them weren't ambitious to like be the
Yeah.
person in charge.
Yeah.
Like there was another younger person who may have felt a little hurt. But we worked well together. He was a little
Yeah.
older than me, but and frankly, we worked very well together. I know that when I got hired, there were two co-owners of the company, and one of them hired. He was an Air Force Academy grad, and he hired me. Um, but I think he didn't tell his partner, and uh,
Ah.
and I think his partner was a little hurt about that. But he never took it out on me, and I think we got along. We're all still friends today. So.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think that wasn't as much of a challenge, but it's certainly like certainly at Hawkeye, I've seen that as especially when you hire a small team and you hire a bunch of people at the same time. If one of those people gets elevated, I think I think that's probably the hardest situation. Is
Hmm.
but I haven't I haven't seen I haven't seen any friendships lost over it or anything like that.
That's good.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that can be a much bigger challenge as your organization grows for sure. I'm
Yeah.
probably missing something here along the road, but if you got more
No,
questions, you can hit me
no,
with them.
no, yeah, we're kind of we're going down a bit of a rabbit hole here. Just so then when you did, you brought up Hawkeye again, and that was kind of when you transitioned, you said, into more of the like formal manager role a
Mhm.
bit. How did that change? Like, I don't know, what was new about that compared to what you've seen in the past, or maybe, or what was there, were there new things, contrasted with kind of that more informal leadership role?
Yeah, I think within my organization it didn't change a whole lot because hired a lot of people that known quantities that I'd worked with before. Um, I mean, I had to do like employee evaluations, which I wasn't doing before.
Got to do the paperwork.
But yeah, but it's great because everyone was great, so that was easy.
Yeah.
I think a
Okay.
lot of the challenge came in that I wasn't. It wasn't uh, one org anymore. It was now like I was the head of the space team, but
Mm,
now there was a signal processing team, and there was like an AI team, um, and there was the sales guys and things like that. Um, and a lot of us, even across those teams, I think it's so critical for the people at the head of those teams to work together well themselves. And we
yeah.
definitely had an issue with at least one of those teams was just didn't want to play well with others,
Yeah.
and and that grew into a pretty bad silo problem. Whereas some of
Yeah.
our teams still worked very well together, but you also had it like between like sales and engineering never talked,
Mm,
and not because I didn't want to talk to them, but so I think it was just a different scale of problem there more than like within the team because frankly
yeah.
I tried to bring a lot of what I learned at Space Quest there and it paid dividends. Our organization really kicked
Yeah.
ass and still does.
It really is important, though. Kind of a point you mentioned. There's a book called Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni.
Mhm.
Very short book. Kind of tells a fictional tale of an executive team. And one of the points that I love most from that book is how, as you just said, the leaders of kind of the peer leaders of all these teams need to see themselves more as a member of that team
Yep.
than a member of their individual teams. And very often we get that reversed. You think, I'm in charge of
Yeah.
this team. Like, you really become deeply invested in, I'm the head of the sales team, I'm the head of the engineering team, when
Yep.
really you need to be more invested in this higher level team,
That's right.
because that's how you work together and
Yeah.
prevent that siloing. So it sounds like it overall wasn't a huge issue, but like you
Yeah.
saw pockets of that prop up.
Yeah, and frankly, like that, you nailed it. That's exactly what I'm saying. I think if you do that, if you do all that well, I think it's also very good to have the teams crosstalk. Like in the early days of
Yeah.
Hawkeye, two of our teams literally sat side by side, and so this team that wasn't working on space stuff was learning a lot about the space stuff because they were sitting next to my team, hearing it, and
Nice.
we could go back and forth. And I think there's a lot of value there. Um, one thing I sort of settled on flippantly, but I think it's the right way to think of these things. I'm curious what you think is I think almost every organizational problem boils down to a problem in communications.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
I haven't found an example that breaks that.
Yeah. I think that's probably right. I think one of my favorite phrases from a manager training that I went to years and years and years ago was, managers are not communicated to, they're communicated through. And one of your key roles, if they don't, now ideally, as you said, ideally there's just like direct crosstalk between the members of the team, and in that case I think your
Yeah,
role as a manager is to help facilitate those connections. But
absolutely.
so much of what your role is as a manager is like, how do I get more people talking, how do I get more information flowing? And before we started recording, one of the pitfalls that we talked about of a lot of managers is kind of that empire building.
Yep.
And I think another pitfall that goes along with that is the like, I'm special because I have this information. And they like a
Yeah.
manager that sees themselves as like, I am the
Yeah.
guardian of these like company secrets or something that I don't want to share with my team to make me feel special.
I have a thought about that. So
Okay.
I've always been very mission driven. Like I
Hmm.
see the big picture, or if not, I want to see it, and I like to take things to end, and I don't work on something unless I care about it. And
Yeah.
I think if more people thought like that, I think you'd have less problems there because I think you've got to be optimizing for the right goal, right? If you're optimizing for like people under me, then that's probably the
Yeah.
wrong objective
Yeah.
function for a successful
Yeah.
company.
I think that's right. And I honestly, that's probably one of the reasons for a lot of SpaceX's success in many ways, from my experience, is that it's just not worth it to work there unless you truly care about the mission. Like you're
I,
just going
I
to leave.
agree.
You're just going to quit,
I
you
agree.
know?
Yeah.
And so that means that you have a higher proportion of people who are mission driven and just like focused on the bigger picture,
Yeah.
devoted to that bigger picture, rather than their own personal journey or their personal advancement.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. Um, Kind of on that, to keep down this road of, in all these different organizations that you've been at, what drives success, what doesn't drive success. I guess, are there any other things that you've seen that where is a manager's role in really kind of helping the overall organization be successful? I think we spend a lot of time talking about, the CEOs or the founders, or that high level vision, but from what you've seen, I know you've been at a lot of these smaller companies as they grow. I mean, and so for you, maybe this is like the other teams the other team leaders that you saw. How can a manager help promote like innovation and drive and success inside of their teams?
Yeah. And I'm going to answer this question also in the contrast for how I see it and how some people see it, which I think is
Okay.
probably not the right way to see it. I generally see my job as as to remove obstacles from people's paths, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like it's not like anyone's out there to like create a bureaucracy and do that, but it's sort of a natural human thing to happen, right? And so
Yeah.
um, so as you get higher in the organization, you are more and more of your time is taken up in sort of just keeping the pipes moving smoothly. And I think
Yeah.
if you're doing that correctly, that gives everyone under you, if they're good people, it gives them the freedom to keep that innovation running, right? It's when
Yeah.
you yeah, it's and I think that also gives you more freedom to align, struggling with how to say this, but to align the objectives across the organization. Um,
Okay.
but like a counter example to this is, a um, a lot of people see management and middle management as this reporting layer. It's just there to report up to the next layer
Yeah.
of the organization. And I think that's where some of this like ossification happens in organizations. And it sort of, it's hard to tell like the chicken and the egg, but it breeds this also, the sense that like you're either an engineer or an individual contributor or a manager. And I've always rejected this premise. Like
Interesting.
all roles I've had are dual roles,
Yep.
and all the people that I've promoted and have been successful are in that dual role. Because I don't
Okay.
think, and again, I'm biased because I'm working in technical organizations, but I think it's
Yep.
very important for you to have people that understand the problem at the
Yeah.
intersections between layers in a company. Um, so but yeah, if you just, I mean, I'll go right back to where I was in the beginning. The simplest thing you can do is just make it easy for your people to do their jobs and to like be creative and innovative in that. Because
Yeah.
smart people don't like to be pigeonholed.
Yeah. Did you have any trouble kind of making that transition where, like when you're the individual contributor,
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote, just, or, like you're really deep in the technical stuff, and it's like you're promoted because you're the smartest at this thing,
Mm-hmm.
like, or you're getting this thing done. And then now is kind of in more of a manager role. You have a bunch of different roles, but like even to take exactly what you said, your role is more like getting stuff out of the way. Sure, you have this dual role, but almost by just the fact that now you're splitting your time, like you're maybe not as going to be as expert
Yeah,
in any of
100%.
these disciplines.
Yeah.
Did you have any trouble with that switch?
I didn't as much, but I also haven't stayed around in the organization to where you're getting into hundreds of people. Like I,
Yeah.
I probably left Hawkeye when I was around 50 people. And I think
Okay.
really this just, a lot of this, the difficulty here is going to depend on how your organization, um, what its core values are, and like, does it agree with your management style there? So it's almost like impedance matching. Like if the layer above you doesn't think the way you do, but the layer above
Mm.
below you does, you're going to have a hard time, I think. And then it's kind of a question of who breaks first, right? Um, I will say, like, my org at Hawkeye has continued to operate at a high level, and but the organization has grown a lot, and I think there's still a lot of things that could be done better. But I think even if that weren't the case, I think it's natural that you're going to have less and less that you're going to be able to accomplish as an individual contributor. But that doesn't mean
Yeah.
that, like, I think there's more value in hiring a grumpy engineer because he can't do the individual contributor work than to hire you know just a business major to sit
Yeah,
at those
an
interface levels.
MBA
Not
that
that I have
yeah,
anything
yeah,
wrong with business majors,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
but yeah,
You got to be able to. I think I wrote about it. I wrote a blog or something about it a few months ago. Where it was just kind of like you need to be technical enough to understand the problem at a minimum,
yeah, and
even if you can't solve the problem.
yes, and that I'm glad you brought this up because that brings me back to another reason why I think I had less of a problem with this is that I've my whole career I've been like astronautical engineering is systems engineering. Like
Yeah,
you have to
yeah,
cross a lot of domains, and some domains I go really deep. Like I'm going to be the I shouldn't be, but in many organizations I was the best astrodynamicist, right? Or I had a lot of RF engineers working for me, but I could sling a link budget better than they could, right? Um, but I think I see that more as like I see that as an asset for someone who is in charge of a bunch of different teams does need to go a little deep on everything so that they can understand it, they can call bullshit if they have to, and more importantly they can see like, oh, this guy over here is doing something very related to this guy over here and they don't know each other, so I'm going to connect these guys, right,
yeah,
and get some magic going.
yeah,
So I think that's been a real value to me, but I think it would be more difficult if you were a promoted manager from a very narrow technical field. Um, like the guy who I promoted, I've been working with forever. He's really more of a computer engineer, but he'd been working alongside
hmm
my team for so long that while he wasn't like a systems engineer by training, he got it. So I think
yeah,
it's there some people aren't meant to be managers, right, and that's fine. um, I,
yeah.
but I think you do have to have some flexibility to look at different things if you're especially in a field like space. Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like, I mean, that's kind of, if there was one wrapper to kind of put around everything you said, is that's it's the flexibility to adjust yourself to the individuals,
Hmm.
because every individual is a little bit different. So you kind of mold your management style, your leadership style to kind of how the different quirks or buttons that people have. And then you also need to be flexible from the technical perspective of being interested and engaged in kind of these other domains. And if it's not your focus, finding out more about it, so that, as you say, you can connect all these dots, because ultimately that's kind of your role, is really making these connections between all of these people.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and I didn't highlight it here, but we talked a little bit about this before, but that is just as important in being able to speak the language of these other team leaders and these other teams that
Sure.
you're working with.
Yeah.
Like, if I don't know anything about RF, I might have a hard time talking to this other team leader. It's not critical in space. It's a little bit more important than other places, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think it helps.
Awesome. Well, you've had quite the career already, Dan. And I know there's a lot of new stuff. So thanks so much for chatting. I definitely got a lot out of it. I think it was neat, just like hearing your perspective from inside these new growing organizations. So thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you, Matt, and I can't wait to see other conversations with other folks. I can learn how to get better at it.
Yeah, hopefully. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.